If you want to learn how to sing high notes without straining and without squeezing and without sounding like a strangled chicken, this is the video for you. Keep watching. Okay, so everyone wants to sing high notes, right? Everyone wants to be able to hit those super high notes that are really impressive, the notes that everybody wants to listen to, and your audience is going to love you for it because it makes them feel excited, it makes them feel like you have great vocal technique in order for you to be able to reach those high notes. But not many of us can do it easily, and certainly not many of us are able to sing high notes without sounding strained and without sounding squeezy or without sounding like we are using a lot of force in order to reach those notes. We want to work towards having a very clear and relaxed sounding voice, but a lot of times sounding relaxed is not equal to feeling or being relaxed. There's a lot of anchoring and support that goes into a relaxed sound, and this is something that a lot of beginner singers don't realize, because they see the singer sounding very relaxed and they see the singer hitting those high notes with such ease, and we try to imitate these singers and we end up sounding very weak. Okay, thank you. Okay. And the only way for us to be able to sing those high notes with power is to start pushing breath and start using too much strength in order to be able to hit those notes. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you some tips on how you're going to be able to hit those high notes without squeezing and without straining, and using the appropriate amount of effort and support that you need to make your voice sound relaxed and comfortable. So what are we going to start with? How do we begin training ourselves to be able to hit high notes? It all starts from soft and quiet exercises. I know it may sound counterintuitive, like if I wanted to sing high, why am I not training to be able to hit those high notes loudly and strongly? But the thing is, we want to be able to hit those high notes in a soft manner and in a gentle manner, because a lot of times high notes are easier to reach when our vocal folds are thinner and producing gentler and softer sounds. So one of the most effective exercises that I find that is going to be able to help you to hit those high notes easily and more effortlessly is the siren. And I have touched on the siren in a previous video, so if you haven't watched it, click on the links that I'm providing now. So how is the siren exercise going to help us to be able to hit those high notes easily and quickly? Well, when we do the siren, we are actually moving through our entire range. And so working with the siren will most certainly allow us to be able to familiarize with the higher notes in our range. But bearing in mind that the siren is a very quiet exercise, we're not going to push a lot of breath and we're not going to make it loud. It's not going to sound like this. Because this means that there's far too much breath going through and your vocal folds aren't going to be able to stretch into thin folds and have good vocal fold contact in that case. So if you'd like to learn how to do a proper siren in order for you to be able to access your high notes, click on the links provided on screen. So as mentioned, the siren is a very quiet exercise and we're not going to make it loud. We most certainly are not going to use thick folds for the siren, so we're not going to do this. Because that is only going to cause us to use a lot of force when we are singing, and also because thick folds aren't really meant for those higher notes. We need to go into thin folds. And how do we do thin folds? We have to allow the voice to be gentler and softer and quieter. So allowing the voice to transition into a gentler tone while we're working with the siren exercise is a great way for us to find out what vocal range we have and how many high notes we can actually reach. So how are we supposed to do a proper siren? It's supposed to sound like this. So if you notice, the siren is really quiet and I'm not using thick folds, I'm using very thin folds for this one, and we want to see how many notes we can actually access in our range. So this is a great exercise for us to be able to stretch out our vocal folds and also to reach those high notes without squeezing or straining. So my second tip for today for how to sing high notes without straining is for you to allow your larynx to move. I know, again, a lot of vocal coaches will say, don't move that larynx, keep it neutral, keep it steady. But one of the easier ways for you to reach those notes, especially in the extreme areas of your vocal range, is to allow the larynx to move up and down. And also, of course, a lot of pop songs nowadays do have a higher larynx position. So working with the siren and allowing the larynx to move up and down, and also just noticing what your position of larynx is at rest. So just breathing in and out and just placing a hand on your larynx to figure out what is the resting position. And then when you're doing the siren, you can also leave your hand there to just notice how the larynx moves as you're sirening. And so if you notice, for me, when I'm sirening up to the higher notes, the larynx actually does rise, and then when I'm coming down to the lower notes, the larynx comes down. So when we are singing, we want to allow ourselves to have this flexible larynx so that if we need to access really high notes, this is one of the more important and easier ways for us to be able to hit those notes without straining. Now my next tip for you is for you to use thin folds and not thick folds. So just like the siren exercise that we were talking about, we want to use thin folds. And why do we use thin folds? We use thin folds because it's easier for thin folds to access higher notes or higher pitches. The reason behind this is because for thick folds, they come into contact more, and hence when they vibrate, the speed of vibration is not as fast as thin folds. Because thin folds, their point of contact is lesser, they can vibrate much faster. And we all know that frequency of vibration results in the pitch that we hear. So when our vocal folds can vibrate faster, they can produce a higher pitch. But when our vocal folds vibrate slower, they produce a lower pitch. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but generally, thick folds like to be in the lower pitch regions, and thin folds like to be in the higher pitch regions. So we want to use thin folds so that we allow ourselves to be able to hit those high notes easier. So allowing our voice to be thinner and more gentle and quiet sounding is a great way for us to access thin folds. But we have to be very careful that we are not using stiff folds or falsetto instead. For those of you who are not sure what I'm talking about, please refer to my video on thick and thin folds and also on falsetto. I'll be leaving links to them in the description as well as on screen for you to be able to click and view those videos. For those who haven't subscribed to my channel, do click on the subscription bell in order to not miss out on any of the videos that I'll be releasing in the coming months. So as I was saying, we want to use thin folds, but we don't want to use falsetto. Because when we use falsetto or stiff folds, we're actually encouraging our vocal folds to not come together that well and also allow a lot of breath to come out. So when we're singing, we'll end up with a weaker or hooty tone like this, instead of a solid but gentle sound like this. So a lot of people refer to this as head voice and falsetto. So how do we use our thin folds to allow us to access those high notes easier? So this is what we can do. We can choose a vowel. For example, most people would find the E vowel easier for us to be able to hit high notes. So using an E vowel, we can take the E vowel from a low pitch to a high pitch and do it in the way that we would siren. So for example, we can do this. So notice that I'm not going breathier, but I'm also maintaining that the sound is very gentle and very quiet. So we can play with this tone and slowly edge our voice higher and higher. So we can do this. So what we're doing is actually we're stretching our vocal folds gradually, and it's a bit like doing stretching exercises for the body. And so we know that whenever we do stretching exercises, we don't usually get immediate huge changes in our stretching ability. So if, let's say, if a person can't even touch his toes, and if he starts stretching today, you wouldn't expect him to be able to put his palms on the floor immediately, but you would expect some progress to be made. So I would like you to be patient with this thin fold exercise. So just taking it to where it wants to go and not squeezing the voice. So not pushing it and not straining to reach it. We want to allow the voice to go up, but we want to allow it to stretch out nicely instead of rushing the process and ending up squeezing it and straining it. And so if we try the thin fold exercises again, and this time let's do an oo vowel. So let's say ooh. And using an oo vowel is actually a great way for us to encourage our throat to stay wider instead of constricting. And also it makes it easier for us to access thin vocal folds. So just playing with the oo sound, alright, allowing the voice to go up and down and allowing the larynx to move accordingly is most certainly an easier way for you to be able to sing higher without squeezing and straining. So another useful tip for you to be able to sing high notes is to not squeeze your tummy or squeeze your breath whenever you're singing high notes. So again, this is something that a lot of students will have some problems with because most vocal coaches will say, yes, you need breath support when you sing, especially for high notes. But what do we mean by breath support and what do we mean by diaphragm support? We actually mean that we want to support the voice with our body and with appropriate amounts of breath. We certainly don't want to be tensing and to be straining or even pushing breath out in order to reach high notes. So allowing the breath to be relaxed while we are doing the siren exercise or we're doing thin fold exercises is a great way for us to teach ourselves to be able to access those high notes without straining or without pushing from the tummy. And every time we push from the tummy, we are only encouraging our throat to be tighter and to sound more squeezed or strained. Which brings me to my next point, which is we want to look out for any form of constriction in the throat when we're singing high notes. So how do we know whether we are constricting? A lot of times we will sound like what I mentioned, like a strangled chicken. We will sound strained. We will sound squeezy like this. We even sound as though we want to go to the toilet, or we have constipation, or we're giving birth to a baby, or we're lifting really heavy weights. And so when we sing high notes with that kind of feeling, our throat is only going to get tighter and squeezier, and you might be able to squeeze a few higher notes out, but it's not sustainable, and most certainly you are not going to enjoy singing those high notes. And this is also why some singers sound really relaxed and effortless when singing high notes, because they don't constrict and they don't squeeze those high notes out. So even if you were able to hit those high notes by squeezing, your audience would probably not enjoy it, and they would feel that, oh, you're straining your voice, you're trying too hard, it sounds tight, and it doesn't sound enjoyable. So in order for us not to constrict, we want to just watch that we're not tensing the tummy. We want to watch that we don't feel tightness in the throat. We want to always stay happy and joyous so that we can allow the space in our throat to widen, and that makes it easier for us to hit those high notes. And so once we are familiar with those high notes and we can reach them without straining, without squeezing, or without sounding heavy or loud, we are most certainly encouraging our voice to be able to access thin folds, which makes it easier for us to sing higher notes. And so the next time you sing a song, you can try some of these exercises before you actually sing the words of the song. Work with a vowel and work with these thin fold exercises and reach those pitches without singing the song out first. Because a lot of times when we put in lyrics to a song, it makes it difficult for us to be able to sing those high notes because certain consonants or certain vowels make it really difficult for us. So in our training, we have to work with various vowels and be familiar with how we're going to hit those higher notes lightly and gently, without straining, without squeezing, without sounding like a strangled chicken. And that makes it easier for us when we actually sing a song with different lyrics. Alright, so if you want to know more about how to sing high notes and also about how to use different vocal tones, click on the links provided in order to continue your singing education with me. And I just know that if you were to do all the things in this video, you will be able to sing higher notes without squeezing or straining. So I'll see you in the next video.